it seemed to be the one thing that most of us could agree on, but in terms of human nutrition, that you should avoid eating large amounts of ultra-processed foods. That they should, at best, be relegated to the occasional treat or emergency food. Otherwise, you should generally eat whole, unprocessed foods as much as you possibly can, within other, of course, dietary guidelines. And it's those other dietary guidelines that, of course, are where so much of our debate is focused. Here on this channel, I focus advocating for predominantly a carnivore or ultra-low-carb ketogenic diet, and there are people who will, of course, dispute that, say you should do a clean paleo diet, or a clean regular ketogenic diet, or even just a clean standard American diet. But the one thing we can generally reach across the great divide on this subject about was that ultra-processed foods should be avoided. That was the one thing we could agree on. Unfortunately, for us, of course, that one thing we agree on is the one thing that the manufacturers of food cannot have. Because, quite frankly, there is not nearly as much profit in clean, perishable, mostly unprocessed foods. There just isn't that much profit. And we know that those ultra-processed foods are profit by a very simple, logical observation. What part of the grocery store takes up the most space? Is it the immediately perishable foods kept traditionally on the outer ring of the store? Or is it the processed stuff that takes up most of the aisles? With some exceptions, of course. You can find in a lot of stores these days high-quality salt and high-quality animal solid oils like lard and tallow in some stores in those central aisles, but let's be real, most of the stuff on those aisles is junk. Potato chips and frozen meals and things that are loaded with all sorts of fun preservatives and questionable chemical ingredients designed to make the food ultra-palatable, and ultimately, we don't know what the long-term effects are, but we can guess by looking at the ever-increasing American waistline. A group of scientists decided to really reinforce the idea that health can be achieved by eating ultra-processed foods. They did so by taking the standard American diet nutrition guidelines from the USDA and constructing a diet almost entirely of ultra-processed foods. And they want us to believe that you can achieve good health through this. So let's take a look at this article, which comes to us from SciTech Daily, and they provide us this lovely little headline. USDA scientists build a healthy diet with 91% of calories coming from ultra-processed foods. Okay, so something here to remember about the USDA and the FDA. Both are funded in part by contributions from the industries they are supposed to regulate. I'm not even kidding about that. They do receive direct funding in part from the industries that they are supposed to regulate. So keep that in mind when you find out that government scientists have studied ultra-processed foods and constructing a diet that is healthy out of it. Imagine, if you want an even more simpler example what this would be like, imagine that you have a professional sports league, and its referees are funded directly by the players they're supposed to be policing during a given game. Imagine you have 3 referees on a basketball court, and you have, the superstars come up at the beginning of each game and hand money to the referees, or perhaps at the end of each game, that they are the ones who are paying for the regulation of the game. That's essentially what we have going on with the FDA and the USDA. Bear that in mind as we go over this. So from the article, quote, scientists at the USDA Agricultural Research Services Grand Forks Human Nutrition Research Center led a study that demonstrates it is possible to build a healthy diet with 91% of the calories coming from ultra-processed food, as classified using the NOVA scale, while still following the recommendations from the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines for Americans. The study highlights the versatility of using DGA recommendations in constructing healthy menus. The study is a proof of concept that shows a more balanced view of healthy eating patterns, where using ultra-processed foods can be an option, said ARS research nutritionist Julie Hess at the Grand Forks Human Nutrition Research Center. According to current dietary recommendations, the nutrient content of a food and its place in a food group are more important than the extent to which a food was processed. And then here is how they categorize these things. The 4 types of foods are unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Second tier are processed culinary ingredients. The third tier are processed foods. And the fourth tier are ultra-processed foods. Continuing with the article. To test if ultra-processed foods can be used to build a healthy diet, ARS scientists and collaborators created a menu with breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks using My Pyramid as a guide for a 7-day, 2,000-calorie food pattern. The menu consisted of foods categorized as ultra-processed by at least 2 NOVA graders. The foods included in the menu also aligned with the 2020 DGA recommendations for servings of groups and subgroups of fruits, vegetables, grains, protein foods, and dairy. Scientists selected food products that have lower levels of saturated fats and added sugars while still containing enough micronutrients and macronutrients. Some of the ultra-processed foods used in this menu included canned beans, instant oatmeal, ultra-filtered milk, whole wheat bread, and dried fruit. We use the Healthy Eating Index to assess the quality of the diet as it aligns with key DGA recommendations, said Hess. The menu we developed scored 86 of 100 points on the Healthy Eating Index 2015, meeting most of the thresholds except for sodium content, exceeded recommendations, and whole grains, below recommendations. End quote. So really all they've done is prove that you can have a clean version of the standard American diet using ultra-processed foods, with of course the caveat being that people are getting a whole lot more salt than the powers that shouldn't be are recommending, and not as much fiber as those same powers are recommending. That's what they're going for here. What they haven't proven is the long-term effects of this diet. I mean, after all, if we're talking about health, isn't one of the goals of health to have long-term optimal living, right? That's what the point is. And they'll never really be able to address that because you cannot ethically control every single thing a human being eats every single day for decades of their life to study what the effects are. You simply can't do that. You can't control all these factors. The only people you could do that to are prisoners, and there are laws about even that. So what they've done here is shown that you can follow a set of nutritional guidelines that are extremely suspect anyway, with mostly ultra-processed foods. Are you surprised by that in the slightest? I mean, if you are surprised, let me know in the comments, but I think very few people are going to be surprised that you can follow what our government tells us is a healthy way of eating by eating instant oatmeal and canned soup and frozen meals, especially ones that are listed as healthy, like the ones that call themselves a healthy choice or a smart choice, and that you can do that by even eating leaner lunch meats and things. I'm sure no one is surprised by that at all. What no one ever questions are, of course, the standards for these. After all, what are they basing this idea that their standards that they're testing this against are actually proper for a human being? No one ever really questions that, except, of course, people in our spaces, and no official will ever question that, because at the end of the day, you can't question that. At least they can't, because their relationship with these same companies that they're supposed to regulate fundamentally prevents them from ever being able to question basic things like the assumptions they use to make policy decisions. So here we have the silliest thing that I saw all week, which is that you can build a quote-unquote healthy diet based on our totally trustworthy nutrition guidelines from our government, eating ultra-processed foods. Let me know what you think of that in the comments, please. And hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. I'm Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore. Thanks for tuning in.